Republican elected officials in particular to speak out against the misinformation and lies that are in fact are disrupting, and essentially providing an attack on our election workers who potentially face violence, having spent their lives and hundreds of volunteers working to conduct our elections. I think we owe it to them and to our democracy to fight to protect our democracy and our vote, and speak out against the misinformation that clearly has been spread about the 2020 election.
Thank you, Candidate Borrud. And Candidate Nelson.
Thank you so much. Election integrity is key. It's a very good question. In a representative democracy such as ours, it is essential that voters have confidence in their elections. And we've heard from both sides of the aisle and everywhere in between that people are concerned about election integrity. A couple things that we can do, things that I have supported. Number one, we should support the Help America Vote Act. That's the federal voting act. We should support that. We should do what 46 other states have done in election integrity. That is, we should have provisional ballots. That means everybody can vote. We want everyone to come to the polls. We want them to vote, but they need to be eligible voters before they're cast, before they are counted. That means everybody gets to vote. If you're a registered voter, you just put your vote in the machine just like you always have. If you have not registered before, we just make sure that you're in the right precinct and that you're an eligible voter before the vote is cast. The problem with Minnesota's elections now is if there's any challenge to a voter who may have been confused, once the ballot is counted, there is no recourse to make that right. So let's do what 46 other states have done. That is provisional ballots. Let's restore election integrity and confidence in our elections with all Minnesotans.
Thank you, Candidate Nelson. Are there any rebuttals? All right, our next question, also from the League of Women Voters, is regarding women's health. Given the recent Supreme Court ruling regarding Roe versus Wade, state legislatures may be enacting new laws regarding women's reproductive health issues, including access to care. What measures, if any, do you think the Minnesota legislature should enact regarding women's reproductive health and abortion? We will begin with Candidate Nelson.
Thank you so much. Abortion is an issue that I have not heard a great deal about as I've gone out door to door. But I think with the recent U.S. Supreme Court ruling known as the Dobbs decision that returned abortion rights to the states, I think it's an important question. The first thing that Minnesotans need to know is that really not much is going to change because Sandy Keith, Rochester, Sandy Keith, when he was the Supreme Court of the Minnesota State Supreme Court, that court issued the ruling called the Doe versus Gomez ruling that guarantees every Minnesotan the right to an abortion. So many are speaking about this. It's an important issue. It's a heated issue. There's lots of debate on all sides. Certainly I respect all and listen to all, but I am concerned that some are using this issue kind of to deflect from the issues that really I hear at the door. That is public safety, make sure our streets and our schools are safe. Making sure, how do we fight this historic inflation? We'll talk about that later, some of the things I've done to help with that. And then what about our kids? We have kids, 40%, who are not reading at grade level. It's important that all of our kids are well prepared for their futures.
Thank you. And Candidate Borrud.
Well, as a doctor, abortion care is clearly an important issue, a healthcare issue. And I believe the decision about when and if to start a family should be left in the hands of people, not politicians. You know, government should not take away people's freedom to decide about their own healthcare, and women should have the freedom to decide their own futures. It's dangerous for politicians to make these medical decisions. That's why the Minnesota Medical Association has come out and firmly stated that abortion care is essential health care because, in fact, it can be life-saving if a woman has a complication with her pregnancy. Senator Nelson as you just heard, will say that abortion is constitutionally protected. Well, we thought that was true with Roe v. Wade, and it clearly is not true. It's only as protected as the current constitution of our our Minnesota Supreme Court. Senator Nelson has a 10-year history of voting repeatedly to restrict abortion access. I would say don't listen to what she says, but in fact look at what she has done.
Thank you. If there's a rebuttal.
Thank you. We have not restricted abortion access in Minnesota. We have supported moms. We have made sure that women have the right to know, just like any other procedure, what an abortion entails. That is called the woman's right to know. I do not call that restricting. That is giving women information to make the decisions that they need to make.
Thank you. Our next question will come from the Post Bulletin, and we will begin with candidate Borrud.
So just I'll follow up on that. Conceivably, let's just say the Republicans end up taking control of both the House and Senate. They could vote to put on as an amendment to the Constitution, an amendment that would essentially outlaw abortion. So how would you vote if you were presented with that question? Would you vote to let the voters decide whether to make abortion illegal in the state of Minnesota?
It's your question.
Your question, yeah.
Okay. Clearly, I think Minnesotans have already decided this in the sense that overwhelming numbers of Minnesotans support abortion access. And so clearly, if the Republicans sweep both the House and the Senate and the governorship, I think we can be pretty certain that our abortion rights will disappear. And that's a fear that doctors have. Like I said, the AMA and the Minnesota Medical Association have come out clearly about this, because this is about potentially life-saving care for women. So I would clearly, absolutely say that I would always vote to protect that right for women. Women should have the right to decide their own futures, and families should make that decision, not politicians.
Thank you. And candidate Nelson.
Thank you. And the question was about a constitutional amendment.
If you had an opportunity to vote on a constitutional amendment that would ban abortion, how would you vote?
Yes, I do not believe that constitutional amendments are the way to go, particularly on an important issue such as abortion. Our communities are very much divided on this. This is an issue which I feel very comfortable with our Supreme Court's decision. Now, that might not have been my decision. I support moms and babies, and I support both fully. However, the Supreme Court has ruled, the Minnesota Supreme Court has ruled, in fact, as I said, it was Sandy Keith, our Supreme Court Chief Justice from Rochester, one of my advisors. We had many discussions about this topic, and truly, it does belong back in the states. The Supreme Court did overrule. It is time that we have these discussions in our state. Are there limits? Should abortion be allowed up until the day of birth? There are many questions that we've not answered over the years. The age of viability has decreased significantly with all of the medical advancements. So while the discussion is difficult, we need to have this discussion. And I do not believe that a constitutional amendment is the way to have that discussion.
Thank you. Any rebuttal? Our next question will come from the Rochester Chamber of Commerce, and we will begin with candidate Nelson.
In light of the ongoing workforce shortage, how will you work to address the shortage and work to make Minnesota an attractive home for both businesses and employees?
Oh, that is a question that is so important, because it is economic growth that drives our state. It is economic growth that provides the high-paying jobs that our state needs. And it's economic growth that provides the tax revenue for needed government services. One of the things we must do is something that I have been a leader on, which is reducing Minnesota's high tax rate. No matter what indice you look at, we're one of our higher tax states. In this session, my tax bill, agreed upon by all, held up by the House, would have reduced income tax rates for all Minnesota filers. It would have eliminated the double taxation on Social Security benefits. I hear from seniors every night that are facing that challenge. In addition, my bill would have removed this taxation, this misnamed taxation on our businesses called the statewide general levy. It was adopted 20 years ago, and it adds an additional about 27% tax onto the normal property taxes of city, county, schools. It adds that onto every business in our state, making it more expensive to do business in Minnesota. We want more businesses in Minnesota. We want more private businesses in Minnesota. We want economic growth, and we need to empower Minnesotans.
Thank you. And candidate Borrud.
Well, it's really clear from talking with our development experts here in Rochester and in Dodge County that in order to really grow our workforce and grow our economy, we need to be able to make sure that people can actually afford their lives here. So this comes down to a serious investment in the things that people need, like affordable housing. We need to bolster our childcare workforce. Women just cannot get back to work, or families are really disrupted. Somebody is not working because of the high cost of health care. And finally, I think healthcare costs are really holding our small businesses back. In particular, I have not talked with a small business owner who is not struggling with the high cost of healthcare. So, and finally, transportation and transit. I mean, if you're coming from the south of Rochester and the far west of Rochester, we need an efficient and affordable transportation options for our workforce. So I think these are some of the things that our state could actually invest in to actually make this place very attractive for families. Right now, we have a ton of amenities. We have good land, and I think these are the things that people really need to make their families economically secure.
Thank you. Any rebuttal? Our next question was offered online from an audience. And this question is going first to candidate Nelson. As our senator, how would you address the changing climate and move Minnesota toward a more sustainable future?
Yes, I actually think I answered the last question first.
Yes, I know.
Oh,
it's
you
random.
Changed it up.
It's random.
Excuse me, I won't keep track anymore.
No.
Ask the question again, please. Usually it's back and forth.
No. As our senator,
Yeah.
how would you address the changing climate and move Minnesota towards a more sustainable future?
Yes, there is climate change. I believe there's climate change. My opponent has said I do not. Let's clarify that right away. Obviously, there is climate change. Certainly, there are things that we can and should do to address climate change. Fortunately, Minnesota has been leading on this issue, and in fact, we are moving towards a carbon-free environment faster than the nation, actually. And so it's important that we continue that lead, but as we move towards that, we need to keep in mind Minnesotans, and we must, the place where my opponent and I disagree really is how do we implement climate change? And we cannot do it faster than the innovations allow. We cannot do it faster than Minnesotans can afford it. And certainly, I did not support adopting California clean car emission standards in Minnesota. That would have been a disaster now, particularly. So let's keep on the fight for green energy. We need green energy. We need to address our climate changing, but we need to do so through science, not political activism.
Thank you. Candidate Borrud.
Well, I'm glad to see that Senator Nelson has changed her position from 2020 when she denied that humans cause climate change in a debate. You know, the biggest contributors to greenhouse gases and carbon emissions are both agriculture and transportation. You know, I have worked for years with the regenerative agriculture movement to support and advocate and lobby for increased funding to allow our farmers to adopt those carbon storing practices that really make their farms more resilient in the face of our volatile weather. And the other thing that we need to do is move very fast around transportation, which is the largest source of emissions in Minnesota. And so this is the importance of the clean cars rule. Like, we need to be on the front end of change, not the lagging end of it. And in fact, you know, we could be a leader in creating electric buses, you know, at bus factories. That would put us in a leading position amongst all states. And we are producing abundant, clean both wind and solar in our communities. Let's build those EV charging stations for our electric vehicles.
Thank you. Our next question is also an online question from our audience. We're going to offer this to candidate Borrud first. In the Minnesota Senate, would you support legislative measures that would reduce gun deaths, and what kind of measures?
Absolutely. I recognize that gun violence is a public health issue. I mean, every parent needs to know that their kid is safe going off to school, and we all deserve to be safe in our homes, in our churches, our faith institutions, and when we go shopping. You know, the things that I think are most important is that we need to close all the loopholes for gun sales. We need to be able to make sure that we do permitting for handgun sales. And we know and there's been excellent research done this in Minnesota on this issue, that most of the mass shootings in our schools are committed by people who are younger than 22. So we need to make sure that we raise the age of purchasing weapons to 21. Now, finally, there's the thing called red flag rules. This is where law enforcement can remove a gun from somebody who is at threat to harm themselves or their loved ones. Well, when my mother died of a devastating brain hemorrhage, unexpectedly, my dad was suicidal. The sheriff came to take away his handgun, even though he didn't have the legal authority to do so. I think this is something that we need to do to protect all families.
Thank you. And candidate Nelson.
All gun violence is wrong. It's concerning. We have seen a huge uptick in gun violence. We've seen it on the streets. We've seen crime grow exponentially in the last 2 years specifically. Number one, when it comes to gun violence, there's several things that we can and should do. Number one, we should enforce the laws that we already have on the books. That is essential. Secondly, we should make sure that we are maximizing the federal NICS system, which is a way of keeping track of many different indices about when someone purchases a gun. The goal for all of us should be to keep guns out of those who would do harm. That's what I would like to see as well. And then lastly, something that's been near and dear to my heart, and just about every parent I speak with, is concerns about gun safety at school. Certainly, I authored as education chair the first ever Safe Schools aid for our schools. I needed to do that. I am glad that is done. In contrast to my opponent, who was opposed to having school resource officers in the Rochester Public Schools, I support our school resources officers. They have done a great job with our students, building relationships and keeping them safe.
And we have a rebuttal.
I would just like to clarify that I have spent a A lot of time talking with Captain Jeff Stillwell, who is now in charge of both our community services and also a lead in our public schools in the school resource officers. He is bringing a transformative approach to the use of school resource officers in our public schools to actually prevent our students from getting entangled with the legal system. And so I know our public safety officers in our Rochester Public Police Department are making great strides to build those relationships to really keep us safe.
Thank you. Next question comes from our audience online. We are going to begin with candidate Borrud. Do you support this? The topic here is the legalization of marijuana. Do you support the legalization and regulation of cannabis and CBD in Minnesota for adults? Why or why not?
I absolutely do support the legalization of cannabis. You know, cannabis has been used for millennia, and people in our community are using it. People should not be going to jail, especially our black and brown neighbors going to jail for being picked up for using it. It becomes an issue of equity. But, you know, when we regulate it, if we legalize it, we can regulate it and improve its safety. I've heard some concerns from law enforcement about packaging of gummies, the gummies that are now, you know, for sale. I think we have to make sure that these are not falling into the hands of our kids. But let me also say that medical cannabis has been proven to be very helpful to patients who are suffering from pain or seizures or other disorders. And, you know, people aren't dying from cannabis overdoses as they are with opiate overdoses. So I think that we have to make this available and more affordable for people who are using cannabis for medical purposes.
Thank you. And candidate Nelson.
Well, thank you. I do have a clarifying question. My opponent spoke about making marijuana legal for medical purposes, which is already law. What was your question?
Do you support the legalization and regulation of cannabis and CBD for adults?
Not medical, I assume. It's already law.
No reference to that.
Okay. All right. First, I'm glad that I have the endorsement from the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association, and I will tell you what our police officers, our public safety officials all say in this regard. Until there is a field sobriety test, it is irresponsible to legalize marijuana for the broad population. Now, once there's a field sobriety test, we can open up for that conversation. But before that, it is premature, it is dangerous, and it is not supported by public safety. Secondly, regarding the gummies and the THC, that is a problem, that those gummies have been marketed to kids as if they were candy. It reminds me of my work with Tobacco 21 and candied vapes and candied cigarettes, candy-flavored cigarettes, how those things also were marketed to kids. And it seems that the same tactics are being used now with THC-infused, intoxicating gummies to kids. We did do some tightening of that language this year. There is more to do, specifically when it comes to keeping these intoxicating substances out of our kids' hands, and I will continue to work on that next year.
Thank you. Next audience, we have actually the next two questions from the audience are concerning health care. The first, and we will begin with candidate Nelson. Healthcare costs are a strain on families, even in our community, known for its world-class quality of care. What steps will you take to make healthcare more affordable for all Minnesotans?
Oh, thank you. That is a great question, and that is something that is on each and every one of our minds. I will tell you some of the things that I have already done that my opponent just said she opposes, I believe, and that was to make sure that we continue to have insurance available for small business owners and farmers who do not qualify as part of a group plan. That's called the insurance model that we have passed in the state of Minnesota, really year after year since the advent of Obamacare, really took those small market, those individual market products away. And I would say that while we were leading in Minnesota on this, since that time, New York, other states have adopted the reinsurance model because it is a way to make sure that Minnesotans can have health insurance. And we have wonderful health care here. We have great access, but we need to make sure that Minnesotans can afford that. Did you put up the stop sign? Oh, awesome. Okay, I can keep talking. It is incredibly important that we make sure that Minnesotans have access to great health care. Means that they need to have insurance. Other things that I've done that I think we still need to work on, which is removing the requirement that sometimes insurance companies can tell doctors what they can and cannot do, or what they will pay for with the patient. Many of you know I faced that this year when I was diagnosed with cancer in December. I had the insurance company tell my doctor that the treatment that she thought I needed was not going to be covered. I'm just telling you that is wrong. I also, before that, those insurance companies were not going to pay for the advanced screening that my doctors said I needed that found this cancer at the earliest of stages. I will continue to fight against those type of overreaches by insurance companies.
Thank you. And candidate Borrud.
Well, the reality is that I have dealt with so many people, farmers, small business owners, who cannot afford health insurance on the marketplace that Senator Nelson is talking about. What reinsurance has done, and we have now, we just gave them health insurance corporations another $1 billion, ostensibly to lower costs. Well, what has happened is that premiums have somewhat stabilized, but they've just cost shifted to out-of-pockets, such that I have met people, especially in our rural areas, who might have an almost $9,000 deductible. So if they go to the hospital, they frankly don't, they may have $500 in their bank account. That is not affordable health care. We have to remove those barriers for people to obtaining the health care they need. Well, one of the things we can do, and this is something I've fought for a long time, is that we have an excellent 30-year-old homegrown health insurance program called Minnesota Care. Why can't people buy into it? It would be affordable, especially if insurance companies didn't, in fact, run that company, if there was direct contracting between the state and medical providers, and then there wouldn't be an insurance company actually standing in the way of people getting the care they need. And since Senator Nelson took about another minute, I would like to just say, finally, there's another step that we could do, and that's to institute something that I know that the Minnesota House has pushed, our Attorney General Keith Ellison has pushed, and that's a prescription drug affordability board to curb the year after year increases in drug costs that particularly hit our seniors and people with chronic disease.
Okay, thank you. All right, our next question, I'm going to combine two because we've got quite a few questions here. They're both about staffing, and specifically, the one question is, what are the solutions that the Senate can enact to ensure group homes, nursing homes have sufficient direct care staff? But I'd also like to see if you can apply that to child care providers. So nursing home, direct care, group homes, and child care. And we're going to begin with candidate Borrud.
Well, it was a huge failure that we did not pass the spending that was agreed to by all parties. All parties agreed we were going to have 3 equal buckets: rainy day funds, tax cuts, spending, and some of that spending was destined for both health care, child care, and to bolster our caregiving services. Now, I have talked with our child care providers, our disability care providers. They are not getting the increase they need right now to preserve their staffing levels. You know, I know with nursing homes, there's a yearly cost increase, but not so for disability providers or our child care providers. And so people, our centers, our group homes, our nursing homes are using a lot of their reserves to be able to retain staff. Well, if they had gotten the monies that were destined for them this year in the spending bill, people would have been better off. But I know, especially for childcare, and I see one of our childcare providers here, we need to make sure that centers get the stabilization grants they need to make sure that we keep our centers alive, both home, daycare, and our centers.
Thank you. And Candidate Nelson.
Well, thank you. This is a good question. It's something that I hear regularly, that I see, and that people pull me off the parade route to tell me about. And that is the fact that our long-term care facilities and our disability homes have been severely underfunded. Actually, they were hit extra hard by the closures, by the executive closures, because they were not even able to have their clients go to those work sites. But let me be clear about what happened here. And anyone who was there will tell you, you can read it yourself, probably in the newspapers of the time. The Senate stood tall for funding for group homes, long-term care homes. We stood tall on that, excuse me, and the House had different priorities. And let me be clear, there was agreement, as my opponent said, for the 444 agreement. 4 to permanent ongoing tax relief. That's what the Democrat chair over the House and I did. 4 to spending and 4 to the rainy day. You know what the problem was? The House had other priorities when it came to the $1 billion. There was $1 billion set aside for health and human services. That not only included our disability homes, our long-term care homes, our addiction services, and I'm just saying that I don't know what the other priorities were that the House had, but you can look at those bills and you will see that it was the Senate that was funding our disability and our long-term care homes. It's needed.
And a rebuttal.
Well, actually, there are a lot of priorities, and one of them is talked about that. One of the sticklers at the end of session with the Health and Human Services budget is that, yes, we absolutely must fund our nursing homes and our disability homes. I am a physician. I am a geriatrician. I took care of older people. I'm concerned about this, but we have other needs as well in health and human services. And the other thing that caused a breakdown was school funding. And in fact, Senator Nelson in an op-ed pointed the fingers at our teachers and blamed our teachers for why things didn't get done.
And we have a rebuttal.
I don't know what my opponent was reading, but I would never blame teachers for decisions that were made by other people. But let's be clear about the education funding. $1 billion in the agreement was set aside for education funding. The Senate put up $950 million for the special ed cross subsidy. You can talk to any teacher, any school board, that's the #1 thing that they need. Now, why the House did not accept that is beyond me. But that was the final offer, $950 million for the special ed cross subsidy and $50 million to help kids catch up with learning loss and get reading on grade level.
All right. Our next question from our audience here, we're going to begin with Candidate Nelson. And this is, do you support an equal rights amendment to the Minnesota Constitution?
Well, thank you for that question. I've offered an equal rights amendment to our Minnesota Constitution, I think a number of sessions, and I would continue to do so. Of course, the devil's in the details. We have to make sure everything lines up with all legal entities, doesn't have any unintended consequences. Unfortunately, several times, at least once, maybe twice, that I offered an ERA amendment, it did not get a hearing. I think it should. I've been a speaker at some of those ERA rallies. I would continue to support that, and I'll continue to work for what's needed in an ERA amendment to make it work and to not have unintended consequences.
Thank you. And Candidate Borrud.
Well, absolutely. Women need to attain equity in our society in terms of our status and our pay. I think that perhaps the issue was, and I might be wrong, Senator Nelson, but I think it was a question, do we codify it based on sex, or do we allow the word gender, understanding that in our current medical understanding, we have a level of gender fluidity in our society, and so I think we need to be able to acknowledge that in an equal rights amendment.
Thank you. Our next question, we're going to begin with candidate Nelson again. This is regarding taxes. Would you support the 2022 tax bill, which was reported out of conference committee but not voted on by the legislature? It included such features as dropping home income taxes on Social Security, a modest cut to income taxes, a large expansion of renter's credit, and major increase in funding streams to local governments. Why or why
I
not?
think I'm a little bit confused. Did you say the tax bill that we passed out of the Minnesota Senate that I was the author of that did all those things?
Yeah, probably.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So
I
you're
wrote.
saying yes?
I wrote that bill. I'm on record. We passed that bill. Not only did we get full agreement between myself as the Senate Republican tax chair, we got full agreement with the DFL tax chair over in the House. We passed all of those things word for word. They were written, they were adopted, they were passed word for word. As I said, it was incredibly unbelievable that the House refused to act on the tax bill. Now, there's all kinds of reasons why they could say they did or didn't act on the tax bill, but anyone that knows anything about the legislative process knows that the tax bill has to originate in the House before the Senate can act on it. I think my opponent in some editorial said that I should have made sure that House acted on the tax bill. Well, I'm afraid I don't have jurisdiction over there, but I've called on the governor, I've called on everyone to get a special session so that we can pass that amazing $4 billion of tax relief, as you just so well described, that Minnesotans need right now, particularly in these times of scorching, skyrocketing inflation. So yes, I support it.
Thank you. And candidate Borrud.
Well, I think the issue is, are we willing to sit down and compromise? We need to be able to come to the table and compromise on all the things that we care about. And, you know, we can't just pass a tax bill and ask Democrats to accept that and not actually meet the requirements and the ask of Democrats for spending on some of the important things that they requested, like a bonding bill, our schools, and the Health and Human Services budget that we just talked about. So I don't think you can have one and not the other. But I agree, you know, that people want that bill, but my only reservation about it is that it would be a deep permanent income tax cuts at a time that we are seeing probably a temporary surplus. And I am worried as a geriatrician looking ahead with an aging population and unmet needs, how will we pay for things in the future, especially with tax cuts that are geared to the wealthiest. The lowest 20% of the income tax cut that is being proposed by Senator Nelson, the lowest 20% of earners would get absolutely zero. I would be a big beneficiary of it. I want our schools to get money, and I want to make sure that people in this community are taken care of.
And we have a rebuttal.
Well, thank you. I love to talk about taxes. First of all, let me just say I am glad that I heard my opponent say she supports the tax bill that I wrote. Just a month or two ago, she wrote about how she would not support removing the double taxation on Social Security benefits. So I think that's a step in the right direction, and I applaud that. Regarding the tax bill, 20% of Minnesotans, the lowest decile, two deciles of Minnesotans do not pay any income taxes. However, my bill would have allowed even another decile to not pay income taxes. It is factually wrong to say that my tax bill only impacted the wealthy or that it did so at a greater extent. The largest effective tax cuts
We're at the lowest income levels. That's what we do in Minnesota.
Thank you. Okay, our next question also comes from our audience here. It concerns homelessness. How will you support the homeless community in your district? And we will begin with candidate Borrud.
Well, this is another problem that we didn't get enough funding for in the spending bill that didn't get passed. You know, we have some funding for homelessness prevention, but the main thing is people need permanent homes. We need to invest heavily in making sure that we build truly affordable housing for people at all income levels, and this is not going to happen without a public-private partnership. You know, in talking with the new ED of our Housing Alliance here in Rochester, it's clear developers are not incentivized without public funding because of the high cost of land and the high cost of materials at this time. One of the biggest needs in our community right now is senior housing, supportive senior housing. And I think that is something that I applaud our Olmsted County for allocating half the American Rescue Plan dollars to supportive senior housing. But clearly, we need not just workforce housing, which Rochester has really targeted with this tax incremental financing, but we need to be able to build housing for people who earn less than 50% of the area median income.
Thank you, and candidate Nelson.
Thank you. Homelessness is an important issue. We know that everybody needs to know they have to have a consistent, reliable place where they're going to lay their head at night, where they can't work, kids can't study, kids can't do well in school. It's essential. I am glad to say that as a tax chair in the bill that passed last year, my bill included $6 million for homelessness, and some of that came to Olmsted County. In addition, that bill also included my personal bill, the Affordable Housing Tax Credit. Worked on this for a number of years with many people across this community and across the state. It was the largest investment in affordable housing in 10 years. I have been the Homes for All champion because of that work. I know how important it is to have homes. I've been a teacher. I saw kids who came to school who didn't know where they were going to sleep that night. That's something that we should not see in our communities. I'm proud of the work that I've done to help with homelessness and affordable housing.
Thank you. Our next question from our audience here tonight, we will begin with candidate Nelson. This is regarding the LGBTQ population and mental health. Mental health issues among young people continue to worsen. Harmful rhetoric about trans people has become more prominent in public discourse, contributing to the negative pressures trans people face. As Senator, how will you speak out against harmful and inflammatory rhetoric and speak up for the respect of all people?
Thank you. That's a good question. Well, first of all, I think we do a lot by example. I don't believe that I have ever been disrespectful to anyone, no matter what their ideas may or may not be. I think that's something that we all need to model. I did learn, though, that it's very hard to be on top of always telling when other people are doing things that are wrong or that are disrespectful. But I can tell you that my language is always respectful. I can tell you that mental health concerns for all kids, LGBTQ kids have higher incidences, but for all kids, is staggering. It could be one of the worst effects we've had of the COVID shutdowns, really. I'm glad to say that I've been the Legislator of the Year for the National Alliance on the Mentally Ill. I supported early treatment in first episode centers, starting that in our state. They are expanding. We also have the Crisis Center here. I also was leading on the new number for, national number for suicide help and mental health issues that will be manned immediately. I've worked closely with the mental health community. It's a growing concern, and it's a concern for all our kids, and I will continue on that path.
Thank you. Candidate Borrud.
Well, I think this is not just a personal issue about how we treat other people or show respect to other people, but it's a systemic issue. It's an issue where we see in our public schools a movement that is essentially targeting and using our trans youth in particular as a political weapon to isolate them. And as Senator Nelson said, our LGBTQ youth have the highest rates of suicide, especially trans youth. And so we need to be able to give that community our full support, and especially when I think about trans people of color having the highest level of violence directed against them, we need to make sure that we provide security for people regardless of their gender. And I think it's not just about the question of the language we use, but the policies we put in place in government to make sure, for instance, that our youth have the choice to be on sports teams, that they have the freedom to decide where they want to toilet. These are very important issues that I think we cannot underestimate in terms of our youth being able to claim the identities that they want.
Thank you. And I'm going to try to fit in one more question here. We have many good questions tonight, and we're not getting to all of them. So I'm going to take one that I think won't take as long. This is regarding the Electoral College. We will begin with candidate Borrud. Do you support electoral college reform? Specifically, would you support a Minnesota bill that ensures our state's electoral votes are actually awarded to the presidential candidate who wins the popular vote?
I would indeed, because we have had now a number of presidents who have not been elected by majority vote of the people of the United States. I think this is a simple proposition that denies whole states real say in our electoral process by denying one person, one vote. It's a completely unfair system that really puts smaller states at an equal footing with larger states. And I think that this needs reform.
Thank you. And candidate Nelson?
Thank you. Would you repeat that question, please?
Yes. Do you support electoral college reform? Specifically, would you support a Minnesota bill that ensures our state's electoral college votes are awarded to the presidential candidate who wins the popular vote?
Thank you. That is a specific reform to the Electoral College that I think would put Minnesota and many states like Minnesota just kind of in that flyover category. We'd just be reliant upon what's happening with those larger states. And quite frankly, I like Minnesota. I think we do things pretty well. We do have some shortcomings that we can always improve on. But I'm just telling you, I'm not interested in listening to California and New York and Florida and have them determine where our Minnesota Electoral College votes go. I think our founders were incredibly foresight. They had great foresight to put that in. Most of us really never thought too much about the Electoral College growing up, but I would encourage you to study that a little bit, think about how that might impact Minnesota and being Minnesotans and not being more like Californians or New Yorkers. So I would oppose that.
Thank you. We are going to move on to closing statements now. You will have 2 minutes to offer your closing statement, and candidate Borrud will go first.
Thank you. I believe we face a very stark contrast in values this election. We can choose between a willingness to compromise to make sure we fund what our communities need and help struggling families, or choose a senator that broke faith, refused to negotiate, and walked away from her responsibility to us. We can fall for talk that sows fear and division, or we can pull together to face our many challenges like funding caregiving in schools, tackling homelessness, and acting on the climate emergency. My opponent says she wants to lower healthcare costs, but she just rallied in Casson with pharma. The lobbyist for drug corporations that are gouging us. She says she's an environmentalist, but has not fully supported the measures that we know are most important in tackling greenhouse gas emissions, like moving towards electric vehicles and fully funding our soil health programs for our farmers. She's now allied herself with an extremist, anti-Semitic, COVID science denying person, Scott Jensen, running for governor, and last year, she refused to vote for the equipment frontline workers needed to protect against COVID. She's also hiding from 10 years of votes to restrict abortion access. Let's be clear, she will never vote to protect people's right to decide when and if to have a family and to create the families they choose. I am fighting for all of us. I recognize we are a beautifully diverse community. Our future depends on the economic security, opportunity, and success of each one of us. And when we embrace that, we'll build the unity we need to tackle all the big issues that stand in front of us. I would be honored to work for you, and I humbly ask for your vote in November.
Thank you. And Ken,
Do we do rebuttals?
you can have a rebuttal.
Yes, thank you. How long do we have for rebuttals?
30
30
seconds.
seconds.
All right, well, I would say that's the most divisive closing statement that I've ever heard. But let me just say it is full of demonstrably false accusations. One, I'm known for my willingness to compromise. You can just look at the tax bill. We were on the front page of the papers in the cities about that, broke faith and walked away. I don't think anybody who's watching would believe that. And I've been an eagle watchdog on lowering health care costs, whether it's going against my own party or insurance companies or whoever's trying to gouge Minnesotans. And so I just, frontline workers, good grief. We supported frontline workers, and the reason many frontline workers didn't get all they wanted is because of how the House handed it out. I will not hide from any of my voting record. I encourage you to go to my website, carlanelson.com, find out anything you want, reach out to me if you have any questions.
And we may proceed with your closing statement then.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, once again, I want to thank the organizers for putting on this forum and the opportunity to discuss issues facing our area and the state as a whole. I've been out knocking on doors with voters all across Dodge and Olmsted counties, and it's clear people are nervous. People are hurting. Talked to one voter recently. She was hit hard by inflation, so she told me she cut her cable bill. She thought that was going to help her family cover the costs of food and gas, and then only to see those savings eaten up when her energy bill came. And it had increased more than her cut cable bill. Rightfully, she's frustrated. And I can only imagine how frustrated she would be if we adopted some of the proposals that my opponent has put forth. St. Paul had put forth to raise gas and income taxes. I've heard from other voters about how they feel unsafe, more so than they ever have in the past, and yet we've heard this anti-police rhetoric coming actually from my opponent 2 years ago. I'm glad she's maybe changed her mind on that. But politicians, quite frankly, who are calling for defunding the police. These people blame police for rising crime. I hold criminals accountable for their actions. Additionally, I advocated for new funding to retain and recruit new officers, while many of my colleagues oppose those efforts. I hear from my constituents that they trust our men and women in uniform, and so do I. I also hear from people that they want the best education possible for their children and grandchildren, and that's why, as I've said, I've authored that legislation to increase funding to our schools while parents can be involved as well. Between now and Election Day, I think you're going to hear a lot of ads. It sounds like you might hear a lot of mud and mudslinging that will try to distort my record. Again, let me be clear. My only agenda is to represent the people of Southeast Minnesota. I have the same priorities that you do, and I'd encourage you to reach out to me. Do not let the mudslinging fool you. Please be critical readers. I have a record of common sense, solution-oriented service, and I look forward to continuing that next year. I believe that's why I've been endorsed by the National Federation of Independent Business, numbers of labor unions. I'll let you go to my website to see the rest, but I would be honored to have your vote. Thank you so much.
And we have a rebuttal.
I have never talked about defunding the police. Let's just be clear in terms of mudslinging. I am talking about factual issues in my rebuttal. I have met countless times with our officers of public safety, both in Rochester here and in Dodge County, and I support the work they're doing, and it's unfortunate that we didn't pass a public safety bill, which would have provided the resources our police officers needed, and frankly. And the community interventions for youth that we know actually work to keep our communities safe. I do not support defunding the police, and I've never said that.
Thank you. Thank you for those closing statements. I'd like to thank both of you candidates for participating tonight. Thanks for your service to the community and for your willingness to participate in the democratic process by running for office. I'd like to remind you that the views expressed in the forum tonight were those of the candidates, not those of the League of Women Voters Rochester or any partner or sponsor of the forum. If you are interested in more of these events, I was just trying to count them up, but I had to stop. There's a lot of them on many nights over the next several weeks. Thank you too to our partners, Rochester Chamber of Commerce, the Post Bulletin, and the Rochester Public Library. Remember that Election Day is November 8th, and that early voting begins on September 23rd. Don't forget to vote. I'm fairly sure this is a self-selecting group of people that always votes. The League of Women Voters on Thursday night, the 15th, this Thursday, has another event here, right here, and the subject of it is how will a changing climate in Southeast Minnesota impact public health? If you have any questions about your polling place, or you'd like to see your sample ballot, or learn more about the candidates, you can visit the website vote411.org, VOTE 411.org. And to see this forum again, access all the forums from the League of Women Voters Rochester or the Rochester Public Library websites. Thank you very much, everyone.